excuse me for coughing, part 3 of Everyday Use. Meanwhile, Asla Malakim is going through the motions with Maggie's hand. Maggie's hand is as limp as a fish and probably as cold, despite the sweat, and she keeps trying to pull it back. It looks like Asla Malakim wants to shake hands, but finds it to do with fancy. Or maybe he don't know how people shake hands. Anyway, he soon gives up on Maggie. Well, I say D. No, Mama, she says, not D. Wangaro Lawanika Kamanjo. What happened to D, I wanted to know. She's dead, Wangaro said. I couldn't bear it any longer being named after people who oppressed me. You know as well as me you was named after your Aunt Dicey, I said. Dicey is my sister. She named D. We call her Big D after D was born. But who was she named after? Asked Wangaro. I guess after Grandma D, I said. And who was she named after? Asked Wangaro. Her mother, I said. And saw Wangaro was getting tired. That's about as far back as I can trace it, I said, though in fact I probably could have carried it back beyond the Civil War through the branches. Well, said Aslam Malakim, there you are. I heard Maggie say. There I was not, I said, before Dicey cropped up in our family. So why should I try to trace it that far back? He just stood there grinning, looking down on me like somebody inspecting a Model A car. Every once in a while he and Wangaro sent eye signals over my head. How do you pronounce this name, I asked. You don't have to call me by it if you don't want to, said Wangaro. Why shouldn't I asked. If that's what you want us to call you, we'll call you. I know it might sound awkward at first, said Wangaro. I'll get used to it, I said. Ream it out again. Well, soon we got the name out of the way. Azalam Malakim had a name twice as long and 3 times as hard. After I tripped over it 2 or 3 times, he told me to just call him Hakima Barber. I wanted to ask him, was he a barber? But I didn't really think he was, so I didn't ask. You must belong to those beef cattle peoples down the road, I said. They said Azala Malakim when they met you too, but they didn't shake hands, always too busy. Feeding the cattle, fixing the fences, putting up salt lick shelters, throwing down hay. When the white folks poisoned some of the herd, the men stayed up all night with rifles in their hands. I walked 1.5 miles just to see the sight. Hakima Barber said, I kept some of their doctrines, but farming and raising cattle is not my style. They didn't tell me, and I didn't ask, whether Wangaro, D, had really gone and married him. We sat down to eat, and right away he said he didn't eat collards and pork was unclean. Wangaro, though, went on through the chitlins and cornbread and greens and everything else. She talked a blue streak over the sweet potatoes. Everything delighted her, even the fact that we still used the benches her daddy made for the table when he couldn't afford to buy chairs. Oh, Mama, she cried, then turned to Hakima Barber. I never knew how lovely these benches are. You can feel the rump prints, she said, running her hands underneath her and along the bench. Then she gave a sigh, and her hand closed over Grandma D's butter dish. That's it, she said. I knew there was something I wanted to ask you if I could have. She jumped up from the table and went over in the corner where the churn stood. The milk in it clabber by now. She looked at the churn and looked at it. This churn top is what I need, she said. Didn't Uncle Buddy whittle it out of a tree you all used to have? Yes, I said. Uh-huh, she said happily. And I want the dasher, too. Uncle Buddy whittled that, too? Asked the barber. D, Wangaro looked up at me. Aunt D's first husband whittled the dash, said Maggie, so low and you almost couldn't hear. His name was Henry, but they called him Stash. Maggie's brain is just like an elephant's, Wangaro said, laughing. I can use the churn top as a centerpiece for the alcove table, she said, sliding a plate over the churn. And I'll think of something artistic to do with the dasher. When she finished wrapping the dasher and the handle stuck out, I took it for a moment in my hands. You didn't even have to look close to see where hands pushing the dasher up and down to make butter had left a kind of sink in the wood. In fact, there was a lot of small sinks. You could see where thumbs and fingers had sunk into the wood. It was a beautiful lightwood from a tree that grew in the yard where Big D and Stash had lived. After dinner, D, Wangaro, went to the trunk at the foot of my bed and started rifling through it. Maggie hung back in the kitchen over the dishpan. Out came Wangaro with two quilts. They had been pieced by Grandma D, and then Big D and me had hung them on the quilt frames on the front porch and quilted them. One was in the Lone Star pattern, the other was Walk Around the Mountain. In both of them were scraps of dresses Grandma D had worn 50 and more years ago, bits and pieces of Grandma Gerald's paisley shirts, and one teeny faded blue piece about the size of a penny matchbox that was from Great-Grandma Ezra's uniform that he wore in the Civil War. "Mamma," Wingraro said, sweet as a bird, "can I have these old quilts?" I heard something fall in the kitchen, and a minute later the kitchen door slammed. End of part 3.